Hey there, Grade 7 Explorers, and welcome back to our 5 Kingdom Classification Explainer. So, just as a quick recap, remember that our biological map has 5 main groups: Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. In our last adventure, we hung out in the tiny single-celled world of Kingdom Monera. You know, those simple prokaryotic bacteria. But today, we're taking a huge leap forward. We're stepping into 2 completely brand new, beautifully animated environments to explore Kingdom Protista and Kingdom Fungi. Get ready, because things are about to get a whole lot more complex and way more colorful. Let's jump right in.
Okay, imagine we've got a magical shrinking device. We're shrinking down, 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 until a single drop of pond water suddenly looks like this massive, glowing, cinematic ocean all around us. The water is this brilliant, luminous green. And if you look around, there are these incredible, almost alien-looking creatures floating right past us. We, my friends, have officially arrived at our first destination, Kingdom Protista.
Now, before we actually meet the locals, we really need to understand the golden rule of this kingdom. Last time we learned that monorarans are prokaryotic, right? Well, organisms in Kingdom Protista are what we call eukaryotic. Let's sound that out together. Eukaryotic. Eukaryotic. Basically, it means they possess a true, well-defined nucleus. So their genetic material isn't just floating around freely like in bacteria. Instead, it's safely protected and locked away inside a tough layer called a nuclear membrane.
And surviving in this glowing drop of water, it's absolutely fascinating. The organisms floating around us right now in Kingdom Protista are mostly unicellular, meaning their entire body is just one single cell. And as we just learned, they are eukaryotic. They usually live in aquatic habitats, just like our little pond drop here. Now, when it comes to getting energy, they're incredibly diverse. Some are autotrophic, meaning they literally make their own food using sunlight, kind of like plants do. But others are heterotrophic, which means they have to hunt down and eat other organisms to survive. Okay, let's dive right into this and meet our very first creature. Look at that wild, jelly-like blob hovering in the water over there. That is the famous amoeba. It's microscopic, it's eukaryotic, and it's single-celled. But notice its shape. It doesn't really even have one. It has this totally irregular, ever-changing body. And it actually uses this incredible shape-shifting superpower to move around and hunt for its food.
To pull off this amazing shape-shifting trick, the amoeba does something pretty incredible. It pushes its cell material outward to create these temporary projections called pseudopodia. Let's break that scientific word down for a second. Pseudo means false, and podia means feet, so it literally translates to false feet. Just imagine if you could temporarily stretch a piece of your stomach across the room just to grab a snack, because that's exactly how the amoeba moves and captures its prey. Watch closely, because this is like a microscopic action sequence. The amoeba loves to eat tiny bacteria and algae. When it spots a meal, it extends those pseudopodia completely around the food. The tips of the false feet touch and fuse together, trapping the food inside a tiny little bubble called a food vacuole. Inside that bubble, special digestive juices break the food down into simple sugars. The amoeba then just absorbs the energy straight into its body, and any leftover waste, it just gets pushed right back out through its membrane. Pretty efficient, right? Now, this creature is the ultimate survivor. When the pond water is warm and there's plenty of food, what we call favorable conditions, the amoeba reproduces asexually through a process called binary fission. Its single-parent nucleus simply divides in 2. The main body splits, and boom, suddenly you have 2 completely independent daughter amoebae. But what if the pond dries up? Well, in unfavorable conditions, it withdraws those false feet, turns round, and builds a thick protective wall around itself. Inside that fortress, the nucleus divides over and over in a process called multiple fission. When the water finally comes back, the wall bursts open, releasing tons of tiny new amoebae all at once. And you know, this perfectly illustrates just how diverse our little pond drop really is, because the amoeba definitely isn't the only one hanging out here. Let's take a second to compare how some other protists get around. While the amoeba just oozes along with its pseudopodia, take a look at the Paramecium. See it over there? It almost looks like a microscopic slipper. Notice how the outside is covered in these tiny, beating, hair-like structures? Those are called cilia, and it uses them to zoom through the water. Now, let's look at something totally different, the Euglena. Euglena is wild. It has chlorophyll to make food in the light, but acts like an animal in the dark. And instead of hairs or false feet, it swims using one long whip-like tail called a flagellum. So we've got cilia for the Paramecium, a flagellum for the Euglena, and pseudopodia for the Amoeba. What an amazing microscopic transit system.
All right, let's teleport out of the pond water now. We're growing back to our normal size and stepping into this beautifully lit, slightly mysterious anime forest. Imagine it just rained. The air is damp, and the ground is covered in fallen leaves and dark soil. Look really closely at the tree trunks and the ground around us. We have officially entered our second destination for today, Kingdom Fungi.
Now, fungi might look a little bit like plants because they grow out of the ground, but they actually play by completely different biological rules. First and foremost, fungi are non-green. They completely lack chlorophyll, which means there is absolutely no way they can make their own food from sunlight. Like protists, they are eukaryotic, so they have true nuclei. But unlike plants, whose cell walls are made of cellulose, fungal cell walls are built out of a super tough complex sugar called chitin. Say it with me, chitin, chitin. And when they need to store or preserve food for later, they store it as glycogen.
So if they can't use sunlight, how on earth do they eat? Well, most fungi have a heterotrophic mode of nutrition called saprophytic. I'll say that one slowly for you. Saprophytic. This basically means they get their food from dead and decaying organic matter. But they do it in a really strange way. Instead of actually swallowing food, fungi secrete digestive juices directly outside their body, right onto the dead leaves or the stale bread they're sitting on. These juices break the food down into simple sugars, and then the fungus just absorbs it. Literally imagine digesting your dinner on your plate before you even put it in your mouth. Wild, right?
And if you look right under the damp soil of our forest here, you'll see this glowing network of tiny threads. You see, most fungi are multicellular, and their bodies are actually made up of these slender, tube-like structures called hyphae. When millions of these hyphae tangle all together into a huge web, that entire mass is called a mycelium. So those mushrooms you see popping up above ground, they're actually just a tiny part of a much, much larger hidden mycelium network living right beneath your feet. This mycelium network can grow on all sorts of things. In fact, I bet you've even seen this in your very own kitchen. Think about bread mold, scientifically known as Rhizopus. Have you ever seen that white, cottony fuzz growing on a piece of stale bread? Yup. That's a fungus. Some of its hyphae, which are called rhizoids, grow downward into the bread to absorb those digested sugars we talked about. But how does it spread? Well, it grows little stalks upward, and at the tips are these round bodies called sporangia. Inside those are microscopic, dust-like spores. When the sporangia burst open, the spores float through the air, land on some new food, and boom, they grow into brand new hyphae. Now, in biology, there are always some fascinating exceptions. While most fungi are these complex networks of hyphae, let me introduce you to yeast. Yeast belongs to the genus Saccharomyces, which actually translates to sugar fungi. And the crazy thing is, it's entirely unicellular. It reproduces asexually through a process called budding, where a little tiny bulb literally grows right out of the parent cell. And yeast is incredibly important to us humans. Through a process called fermentation, it breaks down sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide. This is exactly why it's used to make wine and beer, and why adding yeast to bread dough makes it rise and get perfectly fluffy. Fungi really do hold the balance of life in our forest, acting as both total villains and incredible heroes. On the villain side, the fungal foes. Some parasitic fungi cause devastating crop diseases, like potato blight or wheat rust. They spoil our food, they ruin leather, and some mushrooms, like the Amanita, are actually deadly poisonous. But on the flip side, as friends, they are absolutely essential. We eat delicious edible mushrooms, we use yeast for baking, and those saprophytic fungi, they are nature's ultimate recyclers, breaking down dead plants back into rich nutrients for the soil. And amazingly, some fungi even save human lives. Which brings us to a true microscopic superhero. This right here is a very common mold called Penicillium. A brilliant scientist named Alexander Fleming discovered that this specific fungus naturally produces a chemical substance that destroys harmful bacteria. We named this substance penicillin. It became the world's very first antibiotic, a life-saving medicine used to fight diseases caused by bacteria. So, a simple little fungus from the earth has literally saved countless human lives from severe bacterial infections. How incredible is that story? Okay, real quick before we leave the forest, take a look at those grayish-green, crusty patches growing right there on the tree bark. That is called a lichen. But here's the secret. A lichen isn't actually just one organism.
It is the ultimate anime team-up. It's a beautiful, symbiotic association between two completely different living things working in perfect harmony, an alga and a fungus. The alga is green, so it makes food for both of them using photosynthesis. The fungus isn't green, but it provides a tough, protective shelter and absorbs water for the alga. They work together so flawlessly that they both benefit, surviving in places where neither of them could ever live alone. All right, let's zoom out for a second and check out our biological map for today. We started out in the luminous pond water with Kingdom Protista, those strictly eukaryotic, mostly unicellular aquatic organisms, like the shape-shifting amoeba, the whip-tailed Euglena, and the hairy Paramecium. Then we traveled to the damp forest floor to explore Kingdom Fungi, those eukaryotic, non-green, saprophytic recyclers with tough chitin cell walls. And we saw everything from single-celled yeast to massive multicellular molds and mushrooms. All right, Grade 7 Explorers, it is time for your final trial. I'm going to ask you a few rapid-fire questions based only on today's explainer, and I want you to literally shout the answers right at your screen. Ready? Question 1. What is the scientific term for those amazing false feet that our amoeba friend uses to move around and catch its food? Think about it. Do you have it? Let's keep the momentum going. Question 2. We just saw the different ways protists move. We know Euglena uses a long, whip-like flagellum, but what do we call the tiny, beating, hair-like structures covering the outside of a paramecium? Take a second. Think back to our glowing pond drop. Question 3. Now think back to the damp, dark forest floor. True or false? Organisms in Kingdom Fungi contain chlorophyll, which allows them to make their very own food using the power of sunlight. Is that true or is it false? And finally, a double feature for questions 4 and 5. First, what is the name of that super tough complex sugar that makes up the cell wall of a fungus? And second, what do we call that incredible superhero team-up between an alga and a fungus growing on tree bark? Lock in those final answers. Okay, let's reveal the answers. Number 1 is pseudopodia. Number 2 is cilia. Number 3 is absolutely false. Remember, fungi lack chlorophyll and are heterotrophic. Number 4 is chitin. And number 5 is a lichen. Give yourself a massive round of applause if you nailed those. You've officially mapped out 2 of the most fascinating microscopic kingdoms in all of biology. Fantastic job today! Our 5-kingdom classification adventure has taken us from the simple bacteria of Monera through the wild aquatic alien world of protists, all the way to the essential nutrient recycling fungi on the forest floor. But hey, our journey isn't over yet. Next time, we're going to scale our adventure all the way up to enter the incredible macroscopic kingdoms of plants and animals. Before we go, I want you to think about this. If microscopic fungi have the power to save human lives and destroy entire crops, what hidden superpowers do you think the common plants in your own backyard might be hiding? Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and I'll see you on the next explainer.